Behind the magnificent crimson walls and gleaming jade towers of ancient China's most powerful palace complex lay secrets that would horrify modern minds. For over 500 years, the imperial residence served as both the pinnacle of earthly power and a prison for thousands of women whose stories have been deliberately erased from history books. These weren't queens or servants, but something far more tragic. Human beings reduced to decorative objects, trapped in a system so cruel that death often seemed like mercy. Today we expose a shocking reality of what it truly meant to be selected for imperial service, where beauty became a curse and survival required sacrificing everything that made you human. The scorching summer of 1424 marked one of history's most disturbing displays of absolute power. When the Yongle Emperor drew his final breath, his death triggered an ancient ritual that would claim 30 more lives before sunset. Each chosen woman found a square of scarlet silk waiting in her chambers. Not a gift, but an execution order disguised as honor. The imperial decree was simple and terrifying. Those who had shared the emperor's bed in life must accompany him into eternity. There were no protests, no desperate pleas for mercy, no attempts to flee. These women, many still young enough to dream of futures that would never come, prepared themselves with the same meticulous care they had once used to beautify themselves for their master. They arranged their hair with precision, applied cosmetics with steady hands, and donned their finest robes as if dressing for a celebration rather than their own destruction. This wasn't love or devotion. It was the ultimate demonstration of ownership. Even in death, the emperor's authority over these women remained absolute. Their individual desires, their hopes, their very humanity had been so thoroughly crushed that they faced annihilation with the same obedience they had shown in life. What the court called sacred duty was actually systematic murder, sanctified by tradition and carried out with ceremonial precision. Within the palace's labyrinthine corridors, where every surface sparkled with gold leaf and precious stones, lived hundreds of women who existed in a state of beautiful suffering. Their quarters were architectural marvels filled with hand-painted silk screens, carved ivory furniture, and gardens that bloomed with exotic flowers from across the empire. To any outsider, they appeared to inhabit paradise itself. The reality was infinitely darker. These women had been trained since childhood in an exhaustive curriculum designed to transform them into perfect ornaments. They mastered classical music until their fingers bled, practiced calligraphy until their wrists ached, memorized thousands of poems, and learned to move with such artificial grace that their natural personalities disappeared entirely. Every lesson aimed to erase who they were and replace it with what men desired. Their daily existence followed rigid protocols that governed everything from meal times to breathing patterns. They ate foods prepared by master chefs, but only at designated hours in prescribed amounts. They wore garments woven from the world's finest materials, but only styles approved by imperial decree. They lived surrounded by unimaginable luxury while being denied the most basic human freedom, the right to make choices about their own lives. Constant surveillance ensured perfect behavior. Palace eunuchs watched their every movement, recorded their conversations, and reported any deviation from expected conduct. Even their emotions were monitored and controlled. A spontaneous laugh could be interpreted as disrespect, while tears might suggest disloyalty. In this environment, authentic human connection became nearly impossible. The quest for imperial attention created a toxic atmosphere of competition that poisoned relationships between women who might otherwise have found comfort in friendship. A single night with the emperor could elevate a woman from obscurity to privilege, granting her better quarters, finer clothes, and increased status. But such advancement came at a terrible price: the hatred and jealousy of every other woman who remained in the shadows. These weren't political alliances or professional rivalries, but desperate struggles for psychological survival. Women who had once shared conversations about their homeland or their families before entering the palace found themselves plotting against each other for scraps of masculine approval. The system deliberately fostered mistrust, ensuring that potential allies became enemies instead. The selection process that brought these women to the palace began with imperial commands that no family could refuse. Across the vast empire, Officials appeared in villages and towns with orders to examine daughters between the ages of 13 and 16. Parents had no choice but to present their children for inspection, knowing that selection meant permanent separation. The evaluation process was exhaustive and dehumanizing. Palace representatives examined everything from facial symmetry to voice quality, from posture to the texture of skin. They tested reading abilities, evaluated musical talent, and assessed the likelihood that each candidate could produce male heirs. Those deemed acceptable were immediately separated from their families and transported to the capital under armed guard. For the families left behind, losing a daughter to imperial service meant grieving someone who was still alive but forever unreachable. These women disappeared into the palace complex as completely as if they had died, except death would have been kinder. At least the dead were remembered and mourned. Palace women were forgotten by design. Once inside the imperial residence, new arrivals underwent intensive training designed to strip away their individual identities. Court instructors taught them to walk differently, speak differently, and even think differently. Their original names were often replaced with new ones that reflected their function rather than their identity. They learned to suppress natural reactions, hide authentic emotions, and present artificial personas that pleased their male observers. The most tragic aspect of this transformation was how thoroughly it succeeded. Women who had arrived with strong personalities and independent thoughts gradually became hollow versions of themselves, perfectly calibrated to male expectations but empty of genuine humanity. Yet amid this systematic dehumanization, remarkable women occasionally emerged who refused to accept their designated fate. Zetian began as a low-ranking concubine, but possessed such intelligence and political cunning that she eventually became China's only female emperor. Centuries later, Empress Dowager Cixi manipulated the imperial system so skillfully that she became the true ruler of the Ming Dynasty for nearly 50 years. These exceptional women succeeded not by accepting the system, but by mastering it so completely that they could bend it to their will. Their victories required sacrificing normal human relationships, embracing ruthless political calculation, and often destroying other women who threatened their positions. Even their triumphs came at enormous personal cost. Not every woman who rejected her fate achieved such dramatic success. Some formed forbidden romantic relationships with palace eunuchs, the only men allowed in the women's quarters. When discovered, these relationships resulted in torture and execution for all involved. Others attempted more direct resistance. In one documented case, 16 women conspired to assassinate an emperor whose cruelty had become unbearable. Their plot failed, and their punishment served as a warning to others who might consider rebellion. Some chose the ultimate form of resistance, suicide. Rather than endure another day of dehumanization, they ended their lives on their own terms. These deaths were officially recorded as accidents or illnesses, but palace staff understood their true meaning. Final acts of autonomy by women whose every other choice had been stolen. Today, millions of tourists visit the preserved palace complex, marveling at its architectural grandeur and historical significance. They photograph the elaborate throne rooms, admire the intricate decorations, and imagine the ceremonies that once took place in these halls. But few understand the human cost of all this magnificence. The thousands of women whose suffering made it possible. Their voices silenced for centuries deserve to be heard. Their stories, hidden behind walls of tradition and male-centered history, reveal truths about power, oppression, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. These women may not have commanded armies or signed treaties, but they endured a form of systematic cruelty that few could survive while maintaining any sense of self. In remembering them, we honor not just their individual struggles, but our collective responsibility to recognize and confront the systems that reduce human beings to objects, regardless of how beautiful those systems might appear from the outside.